Hello and welcome back to the One Take Show podcast. In this episode, we are in conversation with two of the most special guests that are featured on the podcast. We are in conversation with Krishnesh Bapat and Tanmay Singh. Krishnesh is a lawyer practicing in New Delhi, and Tanmay is the Associate Counsel at Internet Freedom Foundation. Both Krishnesh and Tanmay are working for this organization called Internet Freedom Foundation, which they will speak about at the end of this podcast. Meanwhile, what we talk about in this episode is the entire fiasco around Twitter, it losing its intermediary status or the immunity that was granted under which, and all the controversy that surrounds the new IT rules. How is it going to impact the internet structure, our freedom of speech on internet and the social media platforms, and how we as consumers are going to get affected, or the users, what are the pitfalls and what are the things that we need to be aware of. So if you like this episode, which I'm 100% sure you will, please make sure you like, share and subscribe to the channel. If you have any suggestions or feedbacks, write them down in the comment section. I would love to read them. And ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let's jump right in.
You want something, go get it. Period.
3, 2, and 1, we're recording. Hello Krishnesh, hello Tanmay. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode. I am so excited because the topic that we are going to discuss in itself is such a burning issue. It's raising so many questions everywhere. And I think the entire legal fraternity is excited, curious, especially the law students that I've interacted with. They're really curious about what exactly is happening, since it somehow directly impacts us. We all use these platforms, and these developments are obviously of utmost importance. So I'm really, really grateful that both of you could take time off your busy schedule and sit down with me for this conversation. So thank you so much, Krishnesh. Thank you so much, Tanmay, for joining me.
Thanks so much for having us, Kaustav. We're as curious as you are, so this should be fun.
Perfect.
Thank you for having me.
Right. And let me begin this conversation by asking you about the conceptual understanding of what exactly the issue is. So not a lot of our viewers would be sort of aware of what exactly happened and what is happening every day, the developments that keep happening. So conceptually, what do you believe or understand that these developments are? What exactly is it happening with Twitter? And what are the rules and regulations that are in place? I think we'll start with Krishnesh and then we'll move to Tanmay.
Okay, so the genesis of this entire issue is IT Rules 2021. These rules have been notified under the Information Technology Act. Now, these rules basically regulate social media intermediaries, they regulate digital news media and OTT platforms. So they basically regulate the entire internet, or our interaction on the internet. Within social media entities, there's a division. Significant social media entities have more onerous obligations as compared to social media entities. Now, Twitter is a significant social media intermediary, and the obligations for which, as I mentioned, are more onerous. The deadline for them to comply with those obligations was May 25th. Now, those obligations broadly are that they have to appoint a nodal officer based in India, they have to appoint a resident grievance officer, they have to appoint a compliance officer, amongst other things. So there are a range of obligations. Now, the entire dispute between the government and Twitter is that the government is claiming that Twitter has not complied with these obligations, which is where this entire dispute has started. Twitter, before Delhi High Court, has claimed otherwise. They have claimed that they are in process of, or they have already complied with these obligations, and this effectively is a factual question which needs to be answered.
Yeah, I think the issue is much larger than Twitter. Twitter is, of course, the most interesting front where this battle is being waged. It relates to three major aspects of the internet, as Krishnesh pointed out: the social media intermediaries, OTT platforms, and digital news media platforms. Twitter is just one amongst one set of those things. Twitter is just one social media. A lot of people would have followed the whole saga that happened and has been happening with WhatsApp. A lot of people will recall it was not long ago that the whole OTT platform controversy erupted with a particular show that was on Amazon Prime called Tanda. Digital news media has always been a bit of a controversy, and even now, with Twitter, digital news media has sort of been lumped in together. When there was talk of Twitter losing their intermediary protections and their intermediary status, an FIR was filed, I believe it was in Ghaziabad, against Twitter for spreading fake news, and a bunch of digital news media websites and their journalists had also been implicated in that complaint. So there's a lot of battles being fought, of which Twitter is one.
Right. And I think these developments have been happening for some quite time now. Like we've seen a cultural shift in a way. I think this could be because there is a reaction to the development of these platforms, the OTT platforms, or maybe the social media platforms that are intermediaries. But there is a consensus that these developments have been happening in consequence of one another and after the other. Now it has sort of reached a new interesting peak. And one question that comes out of it is that there must have been a rationale behind introducing these IT rules. And what exactly is it that the government is trying to achieve with it? And why is it that the IT rules are specifically moving towards creating this either a sense of accountability or another culture where these intermediaries are sort of put in a particular position, may it be positive or negative from different perspectives, obviously. So conceptually, why is it that the government has come out with IT rules? What exactly is it so unique about the IT rules that now it has started creating those controversies?
Maybe I can answer the first half of the question. Why is it that the government has issued these IT rules? Now, regulation of internet is something which is extremely important. It's something which needs to happen because a lot of things which take place on the internet are not always positive. So we have cases where people are abused on the internet, where they are trolled, where their privacy is breached by other people. In all these situations, the government needs to protect the ones which are most vulnerable. And for that purpose, it is necessary that some regulation takes place. IT Rules 2021 is not the first regulation of the internet. Internet has been regulated in the past as well. There was a previous version of these rules from 2011, which also regulated how these intermediaries operate. Apart from that, Information Technology Act itself gives government broad powers to either take down content over the internet or even intercept conversations which take place over the internet. So regulation of internet is something which has been going on for a while. Now, this entire debate around IT rules, and I think Tanmay can elaborate on it better than I can, is entirely about whether this regulation is correct or not. And that's where this dispute lies. No one is, I don't think anyone's claim is that you should not regulate the internet at all. The question is whether IT Rules 2021 regulate it in a manner which is in consonance with the Constitution.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think one of the things that we need to be very mindful of is that there are two very distinct aspects that we have to keep very distinct. There are two different things. One is the reason for doing something, and the second is the benefits of doing something. And we must be very clear that the two things are not the same. I'll give you an example. Exercise is really good for you. It has numerous health benefits. But that's not the reason why I exercise. I exercise because I enjoy it, right? So the benefits of something and the reasons for doing something are two completely different things. And now I entirely agree that there are a lot of benefits to be had from properly regulating activities on the internet. There are a lot of issues. Nobody is saying that the internet should go back to its Wild West ways of the late 90s and the early 2000s. There is a large issue with cyberbullying. There is a massive problem with fake news. Impersonation is a concern. And all of these concerns need to be solved. Now, those would be the benefits of proper IT rules. But those are not the reasons for why these IT rules have come about. The reason why this IT rule has come about is because there is a larger, greater atmosphere of crushing dissent, of exercising greater control over speech, over citizen speech, particularly when it doesn't agree with the point of view that you're trying to push through the airways. And so we have to be very clear that why is this happening, not what are the benefits to be had from this happening.
Right. I mean, sure, there is, with reference to the cyberbullying, I think I had a very interesting conversation with Ms. Singhal, and we talked about the entire case and how the freedom of speech on social media also sort of had its own repercussions. And I think that's a very interesting point that you put forward, Tanmay. And I think I'm going to jump a gun and ask you a subsequent question on a similar tangent. There was a similar report out on Quint which talked about how these new IT rules are against human rights. They attack freedom of speech. And I'm sure there is a huge section of society, and I'm not passing a verdict here whether who's wrong and right. The decision obviously is out there for the public to have. But with reference, there is a huge consensus where they debate that these rules are required. There needs to be a sense of accountability. I think one very popular example of it was Mr. Sanjay Hegde's case against Twitter, which was, I think, still sub judice to last what I checked. These both sides sort of exist. So if I ask both of you, what exactly is the nature of the statement when we say that these intermediaries are supposed to be responsible, or whether these IT rules are an attack on human rights, and if that statement is slightly more plausible against the other? So I'll start with Tanmay. I think you've stated something on a similar line. What do you think about this statement?
Kausav, I think both positions can exist simultaneously. I don't think that these two groups have to be against each other. I actually belong to both camps. I strongly believe that greater regulation is required. I believe that corporate accountability is required. Some of the ways in which Twitter, for example, if we're talking specifically about Twitter, some of the ways in which Twitter follows its own policies is inconsistent. It's arbitrary. A lot of ways it's unilateral. But my concern is not that we don't need the rules at all. My concern is that these rules are really not the right way to go about it. These rules are an issue from a human rights perspective. They most certainly do cause adverse effects on the freedom of speech. They cause adverse effects on the right to privacy, both of which are human rights. Access to information is going to become seriously limited as a result of the application of these rules. And all of these concerns exist with these rules, not necessarily with the concept behind these rules. Yes, we need to challenge and curb fake news, but do we need to do it in this way? Certainly not.
Yeah. Krishnesh, do you concur with this statement?
Absolutely. No one's questioning the intention of the government to perhaps bring out these rules. For instance, I
am. I am not necessarily of the view that all of the benefits of regulation that I listed out earlier are the true intention behind these rules. So I mean, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but I had to.
So just like to add on, in the sense that when I say that no one's questioning the intention, no, I just refer back to what I said earlier, in the sense that no one is questioning that we don't need to regulate. The question is this the manner in which the regulation needs to take place? And that's why we have seen multiple entities challenge these rules across high courts in the country. So as of now, there are approximately 8 to 9 challenges which are pending across high courts. Individuals and corporations both have challenged the validity of both part 2 and part 3 of these rules before various fora. And the question and like the verdict really is before the courts now. It's for the courts to decide whether these rules are constitutional or not.
Right? Yeah, exactly. And sorry, Costa, just before we move on to the next thing, I just want to say that, we shouldn't lose sight of the real world effects of these rules. I mean, we speak a lot, from a bird's eye view up in the air about human rights and manner of regulation and cyberbullying and all of these things, which may not always necessarily mean anything to the everyday Indian. But these rules seriously affect almost all aspects of the digital life of the average Indian, and millions of Indians use internet on a daily basis. I think India has about 700 to 800 million registered internet users, which is a staggering sum. The operation of these rules will determine what you say on social media. As a direct consequence of that, they will affect what you can read on social media. They directly affect what sort of shows and movies you can watch on Netflix and Amazon Prime, which honestly I spend about 6 hours a day on these platforms. They will directly affect the quality and the quantity of the news that you receive on your news feed. You'll have to go back to the screaming debate channels of primetime 9 p.m. TV if that's what you want. So it's not, I just want to ground this discussion back into what will affect us on a daily basis. The average screen time for an Indian of the sort of viewership that you and I will have is approximately 8 to 10 hours a day. And for those who work on the internet, it's approximately 16 hours. Because if you're not asleep, you're either working on the internet or you're using the internet for leisure. And that's a ridiculous amount of time, all of which is going to be very strictly, very stringently regulated by these IT rules. So it's not an up in the air discussion that we're having. It's every day.
Right. I think if I can make a quick remark here, I think when it comes to the intentions of the government, I think after demonetization, when it all became about cashless economy, we all sort of understood that the intentions don't necessarily, background the actual activity. But it's an interesting position that you have put forward here. If I can delve into a slightly specific aspect of it, if I can ask you that what is it about the IT rules that you find problematic? I mean, both of you, if any one of you have observed any particular section, any particular regulation, anything that is very specific about IT rules that is problematic or that is sort of relevant in the present conversation about, let's say, intermediaries in the present case, what is it about the rules that you think is probably problematic in this case?
I think to start off with, as we discussed earlier, these rules regulate intermediaries and digital news media and OTT platforms. It's important to note, and this is like the first legal argument which a lot of people have been making, is that Internet Information Technology Act does not necessarily regulate OTT platforms or digital news media. It does regulate intermediaries, but neither of these are intermediaries. So the question which arises is whether the government was empowered to regulate OTT and digital news media through a delegated piece of legislation, which is IT Rules 2021. So the argument which is being made here is that the IT Rules 2021, insofar as they regulate OTT and digital news media, they are ultra vires the parent act, which is IT Act, because they didn't even have the power to regulate these entities. So this is the first concern. But apart from delegated legislation, which is, to be honest, a legalistic concern, but it does speak a lot with respect to how much power the government has vis-a-vis the parliament. Because honestly, the parliament needs to be regulating these things. The government cannot be usurping the role of the parliament. But apart from the delegated legislation argument, there are also issues of right to privacy and freedom of speech and expression, which are much more concerning, to which I refer to what Tanmay mentioned earlier, of how this is going to impact of how a user experiences internet on a day-to-day basis.
And Krishnesh, what you're saying about the ultra vires thing, it's not that legalistic also. It also is very grounded in what you and I expect from this nation. I mean, the entire point of democracy is that we elect the lawmakers, and then the elected lawmakers sit and make the laws. Now, just to put an ultra vires argument in the words that I would have understood back when I was a high school student, is that we, the people of India, elect parliamentarians to enact laws. Now, the parliament has to enact a large number of laws in a short amount of time. So what it does is that it enacts broad policy level sections in an act, and then it delegates the power to just sort of like work out the details of the workings of the act, not the intentions behind the act. So the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, the IT ministry, has been delegated this power by the parliament. So the parliament in 2000, in its wisdom, enacted the Information Technology Act 2000, where they laid broad policy provisions, and they gave MIT the power, the IT ministry, the power to work out the details in its rules. It did not give this power to the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting. That power, the usurpation that Krishnesh is talking about, and I don't know if usurpation is the word, but the usurping that Krishnesh is talking about by the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, that's undemocratic, and that should concern every citizen of India, because that's not what we voted for. In what we love to proudly call the world's largest democracy, democratic principles must be followed very, very strictly. And we cannot allow our democratic power, and this is the people's democratic power, to slip away like this. That's the ultra vires argument. And just to go back to something Kaustav you said earlier, it's interesting that you brought up demonetization. Were you able to access the original notification that brought demonetization about? And if you did, would you happen to remember what they had said was the stated reason at that time on November 8, 2016? It was fake currency notes. On day one, they said we are doing demonetization because of fake currency notes. They said nothing about black money. They said nothing about cashless economy. They said obviously nothing about Paytm. They said nothing about any of the various reasons that we heard over the months. So this goalpost shifting is something that you're likely to see for these regulations as well. You're starting to see some of it already. National security, etc., has been thrown about when they're talking about traceability and encryption for WhatsApp. Safety of women online has started coming up, which wasn't necessarily one of the stated reasons at the beginning. So you're going to see a lot of these reasons which are not the same as the reasons that were originally given. So that's going to be interesting. Now, having got that diversion out of the way, otherwise it would have kept bugging me. To talk about some of the specific rules that cause issues, is that there are existing procedures in place. And I'm not saying that you can't amend existing procedures. I'm saying that you can't amend existing procedures in an undemocratic, unconstitutional way. So in the Shreya Singhal judgment, which, as you mentioned, you spoke to Shreya Singhal a little while ago. In the Shreya Singhal judgment, section 79, section 69, section 69A of the IT Act, they were all examined by the Supreme Court. They were all held to be in varying degrees, and certain other rules also framed under the IT Act were held to be valid by the Supreme Court on the basis of certain procedures, which is that the government will issue an order, and the order can be complied with over certain timelines. Now, these rules have seriously reduced these timelines. They've reduced these timelines to such an extent that Twitter, which by the way has approximately 20 million users in India, and think of how many tweets and status messages and comments and replies people post in India on a daily basis, and how many grievance reports that's going to generate on a daily basis, how many complaints Twitter is going to see on a daily basis. The timelines have been so reduced so heavily that Twitter basically has no opportunity to examine any request or order or direction in detail and apply its mind to it. Basically, all Twitter is going to become is a rubber stamp middleman receiving a letter from the government and taking down my content. That is a serious attack on our freedom of speech. It causes what is called a chilling effect, and a chilling effect, just to speak to the high school version of me, is when you don't directly tell people that you cannot say something, but when you create conditions that put a fear in my mind, where I stop myself from saying something that I am otherwise entitled in law to say. And that is the situation that you're going to see on social media going forward. So that's one of the concerns. A major concern, which I'm certain you would have brought up with me if I hadn't done myself, is the issue of traceability. Now, WhatsApp are not the only one. There are other services also that offer end-to-end encryption. And what end-to-end encryption basically means is that if I send you a message, Kaustav, only I can read it and only you can read it. And nobody else in the middle can intercept that message or read it, including WhatsApp, even when the message passes through WhatsApp server. So it's encrypted, and only your device can decrypt it. The traceability requirement, which basically says that social media intermediaries that offer messaging related services have to enable the traceability of the first originator of a message. So if a message gets forwarded many times, you need to be able to go back and find out who is the person who first sent that message. Now, there are millions of problems with this. Anybody who hears of it the first time can come up with 5 off the top of their head. For example, what will happen if I just copy paste the message instead of forwarding it? Am I the new first originator? Will I go to jail? Those kind of issues. If somebody sends it from outside India and it comes into India, how do you know it's not, like, how does that person have jurisdiction? How will you disable end-to-end encryption and enable traceability only in India, but keeping the global architecture of the technology intact? It's an unworkable proposition. So that's one of the problems. The constitutional problem with that is that it seriously affects your right to privacy, which was recognized by the Supreme Court in K.S. Puttaswamy in 2017 as part of Article 21. I could go on, really. You'll have to stop me at some point. So when Krishnesh was talking about all of the various officers that these companies have to appoint, one of them is a nodal officer that Krishnesh has mentioned. Now, the nodal officer according to the wording of the rules, is literally called a 24/7 nodal officer. According to the wording of the rules, he is supposed to maintain 24/7 contact with the government authorities. Now, what does this mean? If you, Kaustav, have the misfortune of one day becoming a nodal officer for one of these companies, and some officer from the Ministry of Home Affairs calls you at 3 in the morning on a Saturday, you are now legally obliged to pick up that call and assist them with whatever it is that they need at 3 in the morning on a Saturday, because it says 24/7. There are no days off, there is no evenings, there is no weekends, nothing. Who's going to take this job? How is this going to work? Where is the practicality in these rules? I mean, it's not just this provision. It's this lack of practicality flows through all the provisions of the rules. I mean, it is what it is. Please stop me. I mean, I'm just going to keep going if you don't.
No, I had a very specific question on that, which I think you've already answered when I was going to ask you about WhatsApp's case in the Delhi High Court and how they're bringing up Putuswamy. I think every issue should be made a tax issue, and then subsequently it will reach one of the higher courts and they'll make a judgment out of it. But I think in this case, with reference to WhatsApp, talking about the privacy issue, which you have very beautifully examined as to how it is going to be traced back to the original sender and what are the practical issues involved in that and what are the various issues. I think one of the major concerns that come out of it is that now would the responsibility fall on myself, which usually it did in the past, but what exactly is the role of Twitter anymore? Are they they've lost their intermediary status? And I'm bringing this conversation back to Twitter specifically. I mean, they've temporarily sort of lost that intermediary status, or it was in a bay, and now the question is back whether this intermediary status would be restored or not, or if it is not to be restored, or if it is to be completely done away with, what could be the repercussions? Not just on Twitter. If you look at the stakeholders, the users, the consumers, the government, what could be the repercussions of the same? So sure, I would love to learn more about this one. And yeah, please, any one of you could please feel free to speak about it.
And so it's actually incorrect that Twitter's intermediary status has been taken away.
Okay.
Now, under Section 79, all these intermediaries have been given safe harbor, which means that they cannot be held liable for content posted by other people, which makes sense. Why should Facebook be held liable for what Krishnesh posts on Facebook, however unlawful it may be? Now, the caveat to that is that they have the intermediary status as long as they comply with guidelines the government issues from time to time. Now, the 2021 IT rules is one of those guidelines. Now, the government is saying that Twitter has not complied with IT rules and hence it has lost its intermediary status. However, that's a factual question which is for the court to determine. So, for instance, in the Ghaziabad FIR case, where Twitter is named as one of the accused, the prosecution can take Twitter's officers to court and say that they should be held liable. Twitter in response can say that I am protected by Section 79, which gives me safe harbor. The prosecution can argue that you don't have safe harbor because you haven't complied with IT rules, but Twitter can very well say that we have in fact complied. Compliance with IT rules itself, is a factual question. Intermediary status is not something which can be given and taken away. It is not a registration. So it is incorrect on part of generally media to say that intermediary status of Twitter has been taken away. It's not a registration.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm so sorry. If you don't mind me jumping in, Krishnesh, I was just saying, once again to speak to high school version of myself. This losing the intermediary protection stems from Rule 7 of the rules, which is a penal provision. Now, who applies the penal provision? The courts do. The government does not. So, for example, assuming, just for the sake of discussion, this has no resemblance to anything real. Assuming I commit a crime of some sort, am I now automatically, do I disappear from where I am and reappear in jail? No. I have to be tried. There's a fact-finding and evidence production stage that will happen before the courts. There's all sorts of various procedures and processes that have to be that have to go on before a court will sit and decide whether the penal provisions of law have to be applied to me or not. Similarly, and it doesn't matter how publicly I committed this hypothetical crime. I mean, I could be in the middle of Rajiv Chowk screaming something that's just absolutely illegal to say, and I still have to be tried regardless of how many witnesses were there. So the counter argument that I will definitely receive is, but we know Twitter has not complied. That's not enough. You know this, but has it been shown in a court of law? No, it hasn't yet. Maybe it will be, and it may very well be that the court will decide that Twitter is not in compliance with the IT rules, and the IT rules are valid, and they need to be in compliance, and they're not in compliance, and therefore they will not have the intermediary status. But that's a determination for that day, not today. As of today, Twitter continues to maintain its intermediary protections.
Right. I've been trying to get in touch. No. I've been trying to get in touch with some Twitter executives so I can directly ask them, although they've all refused my request, saying this is a very sensitive matter. I completely understand that. But this is a question like, what exactly is the position of Twitter? Are they complying with the government? Are they in consonance with the ID rules? Because I believe that their status, obviously, all of these arguments and all of these conversations would make a lot more sense once the matter is somehow adjudicated by the courts. But as of this moment, do you think that Twitter or any other intermediaries that are currently working in the industry and the upcoming ones that will soon find their way into it, would they find themselves in a position of agreeability with the government, or would they have to put the foot down and possibly we'll see an exodus of a sort?
So Twitter is also involved in the litigation in Delhi High Court, where the petitioner is claiming that Twitter has not complied with the IT rules. Twitter, in response, in those proceedings, as well as publicly otherwise, has stated that one, we are complying with the rules, and two, if not, we intend to comply with these rules. As of this date, these rules are valid. No court has imposed a stay on these rules, and there is an obligation on all these intermediaries to comply with them. If they don't, then the consequences will ensue, like we mentioned earlier. So what will happen is not that their status as an intermediary will be taken away, but they will be at the risk of potential prosecution in certain cases, where they will have to raise the defense that they are complying with the rules or they are not complying with the rules. But it makes them open to various prosecutions across the country. Having said that, I would just go back to my previous point. They do have to comply with these rules, and in my knowledge, at least, Twitter does intend to comply with these rules. I obviously cannot speak for what Twitter may or may not do.
Right. I think one thing, I'll also confirm this with Tanmay. One fallout of these rules is going to be Twitter sort of acting arbitrarily, where they would have to save themselves from most of these cause of actions. So what they'll do is they will not take any risk whatsoever. They will simply suspend the accounts the moment they put out anything that they believe is incorrect, it's not appropriate, or would land them in trouble. I think the entire Mr. Sanjay Hegde issue would then become very rampant. Everybody would find themselves in a position of shadow blocking becoming sort of legitimized in one way or the other. So is this a fallout that we as stakeholders should be very, very concerned about? Or is it an opportunity for, like, let's say what happened with MySpace and other companies coming in and replacing Twitter, but they would again have to comply with this, and they will, if they do not, they will lose their status. So this again is a fallout on the consumers.
Yeah, I think you identified the problem like quite accurately, actually, Kaustav. That's exactly the problem, that Twitter will now start overzealously self-censoring and regulating content on its platform by its own accord. And I think the reason why Twitter will be forced to do that or pressurized to do that is, again, one of the rules that are contained in the IT rules, which is that Twitter can be held criminally liable under criminal law for content that's posted on their platform. So if it's defamatory content, you go under civil defamation, fine. But if it's criminal defamation, and I mean imprisonments and arrests ensue, that's a huge problem for Twitter. I mean, the MD of Twitter, Manish, I believe, he received a summons from Ghaziabad police station. He said, I'll do it online through video conferencing. They said, no, you come to the police station and you depose before us. Now that's a surprising situation, because I'm not sure Twitter's role is here. They just provide the platform. I mean, if you have a problem with a theater actor, you don't sue the stage maker.
Right. I think that somehow sums up the major part of the conversation that I was looking for. I'm really sort of not just excited, also curious, but very enthusiastic about learning more about this. And like any law student these days, everyone claims to have an interest in technology law, and I'm sure like people are sort of learning into it. internet freedom is something that is definitely one of the major areas where we all should pay a significant amount of interest in, significant amount of attention needs to go there. And I'm really grateful that I have an opportunity to sort of speak about it with people who are working with an organization that beacons this entire idea, that beacons this principle. So as before we sort of conclude this conversation, I think I would also like to, if all the viewers are not introduced to it already, sort of introduce everyone to Internet Freedom Foundation. So, Krishnesh, if you could please tell me what is IFF and what is it exactly, the principle behind this organization?
So, IFF is a non-profit entity. We are run solely out of donations based out of members in India. We do not accept foreign donations. Our goal is, we have numerous goals, but we primarily work to ensure digital rights over the internet are protected. There are a number of verticals in IFF. Tanmay and I are part of the litigation vertical. So we are responsible for filing strategic litigation cases across the country to ensure that digital rights of individuals are protected and the constitution is not violated. There are other verticals as well, such as the RTI or transparency vertical, where we try and get more information about the policies of the government. Often these policies are taken often these decisions are taken in an opaque manner, and we seek more transparency regarding that. There is also a policy vertical which constantly interacts with the government. So before laws are made, we provide our comments to the law government is proposing, so that those laws are also mindful of the digital rights of Indian users. Apart from that, digital security vertical is also being built at IFF, which will provide Indian users a better understanding of how they can protect their privacy on the internet. So these are broadly the different verticals of IFF, and we are totally committed towards protecting rights of users over the internet.
Perfect. And one of the major questions that now, sort of come out of this is, how can law students or legal professionals, number one, use the services of this organization, number two, take the benefit out of it, learn the various developments that are happening, the work that you've been doing, and more so contribute, may it be work for you or somehow help this organization out. Everyone who feels passionately about it would definitely want to know more about it. So maybe Tanmay, you could tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think the best and the most direct way to contribute to what we're trying to do is to just give us some of your money. As Krishnesh mentioned, we're a not-for-profit and we don't accept any foreign funding, and we don't accept a lot of organizational funding also. We're entirely dependent on you, the individual Indian citizen, for our salaries and for all of our advocacy. But beyond that, beyond simply cash money, what you can do to help is you can keep these conversations alive. We put out a lot of academic material and resources to gain a deeper understanding into all of the various issues that you've heard of, even some that you haven't yet heard of but will. We invite you to engage with those materials. We invite you to, you can even reach out to us if you want clarifications. If something is not clear to you, we're very, very happy to have conversations such as this one. Once you've engaged with the materials, we strongly encourage you to spread the word, to spread awareness about these issues, because digital rights is really not something, it's not cloud, it's not up in the air, it's not in the cloud, it's on the ground. It affects you on a daily basis. It affects everybody on a daily basis. So it's something that should be talked about all of the time. That's one of the ways. Another manner in which we strongly invite support is, if there are any issues that come up, please do share it with us. We try to watch the news and all the various developments at a very close, with a close watch. But there's always going to be something or the other that we will miss. So we are very grateful to the IFF community that constantly engages with us on our forum. You'll find the forum link on our website, which is internetfreedom.in. Please visit the forum. If there's anything that we may have missed, bring it to our notice. If there's anything that we can do about it, we 100% will. And there's lots of different things that we do when we engage with an issue. Some things are appropriate for strategic litigation, so we take those reports. For some things where you might require more information, we file RTI requests and the subsequent appeal process. For some things, we try to do community outreach and policy outreach. We draft joint representations and joint letters. We engage with regulatory bodies. We engage with government office holders. We have various a whole menu of strategies that we employ, whichever is the most appropriate for the issue at hand. So keep bringing us issues. We keep our watch. Sometimes we miss things, and we'd be very grateful for that. So those are many ways, and many of them non-monetarily, in which law students can help. Because I remember when I was a law student, I used to have like about 100 rupees per day. And I am not donating to an NGO out of my 100 rupees per day. That was lunch money strictly. So I fully understand that. You can pay us in information.
Perfect. Wonderful. I think this has to be the best pitch. And if I'm going to copy that, ever if I'm going to use this. Bye bye, I'm telling you right now.
If you become a commercial lawyer, don't use it with your clients. It doesn't work. Commercial lawyers have no use for this pitch.
No, I'm still in my final year. I'm still just as confused. So no one knows. I might just be right next to you working for internet freedom in our country and might as well exploiting. Yeah, I think
that
this
actually is a fantastic point that I missed out. Is from time to time we put out we are a very small team of highly motivated, and I'm saying it myself, but it's still true, highly driven, intelligent, hardworking, diligent people, and we're constantly on the lookout for more. So if you follow us on Twitter, the next time we have a vacancy in any of our teams, you'll find out about it. So please do apply to IFF. At the whenever there is a vacancy, we're always looking for the brightest talent.
Wonderful, perfect. I think I was just reading one of the articles that IFF put out on Clubhouse and the rights about the same, and it was really interesting. And I think I personally am a free speech absolutist for everyone who's at all concerned or is interested in knowing about free speech in our country and how internet plays a role in it. Would definitely love to learn more about it and would definitely connect with IFF. As we conclude this conversation, Krishnesh, do you have any closing remarks for this conversation?
No, I think Tanmay has elaborated on IFF's works perfectly. We really look forward to engaging with people who are also committed to internet freedom. We want to interact with more of you. If you look at our Twitter or our Instagram, we put out our work on a daily basis, which shows how much effort we are putting on a day-to-day basis towards securing digital rights. So yes, we look forward to actively engaging with people so that our work also increases and at the same time rights are secured.
Wonderful. And Tanmay, do you have any closing remarks for our viewers?
Yeah, my only closing remark is that the Clubhouse post that you brought up, that was Krishnesh. He did most of the research and the analysis on it, and you can tell how in-depth and well-researched it is. The other remark I'm going to make is thank you so much for doing this and having us on. Honestly, as we were discussing at the break, we were not law students the way you are. You're really seizing all of your opportunities, and we're actually very, very impressed. Please keep doing what you're doing. I think it's really important, and you're also doing it well, which is great. This conversation has been super fun. I don't know how it will come out when you actually do put it up. Perhaps your viewers will get bored and go to sleep, but we thoroughly enjoyed ourselves.
Yeah, we did, and we look forward to enjoying the Tunde as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is going to be one of my major agendas every time I visit Delhi, is to, number one, connect with you, meet you, learn more about your experiences and sort of connect on a different physical plane altogether. And also to get you all the wonderful food from Lucknow, because again, we are out here to conquer the world with the food out here, straight from Awadh. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Krishnesh. Thank you so much, Tanmay. It was a wonderful, wonderful conversation. And thank you so much for taking time out. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Costa. Thank you.
Thank you.